Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Test of Loyalty. Frank Mueller adjusted his safety harness as he hammered the final shingle onto the Andersons' roof. At 42, his weathered hands moved with the precision of someone who had spent 2 decades in construction. The June sun beat down mercilessly, but Frank barely noticed. He had learned long ago to endure discomfort. It was a skill that had served him well in more ways than his neighbors could imagine. His phone buzzed against his chest. Tyler's name flashed on the screen. "Hey, Dad." His 17-year-old son's voice carried an odd mixture of excitement and cruelty. "Happy Father's Day, I guess." Frank paused, hammer halfway to the next nail. Something in Tyler's tone set off alarm bells. "Thanks, son. How was your day with your mother?" "Oh, it was great. Really great, actually." Tyler's laugh held no warmth. "Mom told me some interesting things, like how you're basically broke and we're moving in with Rick. You know, her boyfriend?" The hammer slipped from Frank's grip, clattering down the roof before catching in the gutter. 23 years of marriage, and Linda had finally shown her true colors. But it was Tyler's next words that cut deepest. "Rick's rich and successful, Dad. Unlike you." The teenager's voice grew more animated, feeding off what he perceived as his father's weakness. "Mom's already changed the locks. She said maybe you should get a job that actually pays. $23,000 a year isn't enough for a real man." Frank closed his eyes, feeling something cold and final settle in his chest. His son, his own blood, was laughing at him, mocking the very sacrifices Frank had made to test their family's loyalty. For 3 years, he had lived as a simple contractor, hiding his true wealth to see if his wife and son loved him for who he was, not what he owned. Now he had his answer. "Interesting," Frank said quietly. "What's interesting?" Tyler's laughter faltered slightly at his father's calm tone. Frank pulled out his second phone, the one Linda and Tyler had never seen. "Give me 1 minute, son." The call connected on the first ring. "Donovan Industries, this is Rick Donovan." "Rick, this is Frank Mueller. We need to talk." There was a pause. "Frank Mueller? I don't think I know any. You know my wife, Linda?" "Quite well, from what I understand." Frank's voice remained conversationless, but those who knew him would have recognized the deadly calm. "What you don't know is that I own your company. Half of the past 7 years through Meridian Holdings. Check your corporate structure, Rick. Check who really signs your paychecks." The silence on the other end stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Frank could hear frantic typing, then a sharp intake of breath. That's impossible," Rick whispered. "Meridian Holdings owns 68% of Donovan Industries. I am Meridian Holdings. Every promotion you've received, every bonus, every company car, I approved it all. And Rick," Frank's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, "I'm about to show you what happens when someone takes what belongs to me." Frank ended the call and returned to his original phone. Tyler was still there, but his laughter had died completely. Dad, what was that about?" "Tyler, do you remember when you were 8 and you asked me why I always told you to be loyal to family above all else?" Yeah, I remember. I told you that loyalty isn't just about standing by someone when it's easy. It's about choosing them when the whole world gives you reasons not to." Frank began gathering his tools, each movement deliberate and precise. "Your mother failed that test. And son, so did you." "What are you talking about?" "Dad, you're scaring me." Frank climbed down from the roof with practiced ease. "You should be scared, Tyler, because in about 6 hours, you're going to understand that the man you just mocked, the father you just betrayed, isn't the man you thought he was." He hung up and made his second call of the day. "Morrison, it's Frank. Execute Protocol 7. "Yes, all of it." "And Morrison, make sure Linda and her boyfriend understand that I don't just take what's mine back. I take everything." Chapter 2. The Empire in Shadow. Frank's home, the modest 3-bedroom ranch that Linda had always complained about, sat empty and violated. The changed locks were a nice touch, he thought as he stood in his driveway. It showed just how little Linda understood about who she was really dealing with. Instead of forcing his way in, Frank drove across town to a building Linda had never seen. A sleek glass tower that housed the headquarters of Meridian Holdings. His real office was on the 40th floor, behind doors that required biometric scanners and security clearances Linda couldn't have imagined. Morrison Webb, his chief operations officer and the only person who knew the full extent of Frank's empire, was waiting with files spread across the conference table. "It's done," Morrison said without preamble. "Donovan's been removed as CEO effective immediately." The board meeting was enlightening. Frank nodded, settling into his chair. Morrison had been with him for 15 years, ever since Frank had pulled him out of a corporate scandal that would have destroyed his career. Loyalty, once earned, was rewarded generously in Frank's world. "Tell me about Rick Donovan." Morrison opened the first file. Rick Donovan, 45 years old. MBA from Northwestern, divorced twice, no children. He's been CEO of Donovan Industries for 8 years, believing he earned the position through merit. Morrison's slight smile suggested otherwise. What he doesn't know is that we acquired the company specifically to test his capabilities. He's competent but unremarkable. His salary is $400,000 annually, plus bonuses. His penthouse apartment costs $6,000 a month. His cars are leased through the company, and his country club membership is corporate sponsored. "All of which I've been paying for," Frank said. "And Linda Marie Mueller, née Patterson, 40 years old, community college dropout. She worked as a receptionist at Patterson Marketing when you met her, a company that, incidentally, we acquired 2 years after your marriage." Morrison's expression remained neutral, but Frank caught the implication. "You've been watching her that long? You asked me to monitor potential security risks to your identity. A wife with expensive tastes and flexible morals qualified." Morrison turned to another file. "She's been seeing Donovan for 8 months. She believes he's her ticket to the lifestyle she's always wanted. What she doesn't realize is that everything she's fallen in love with, his wealth, his status, his success, comes from you." Frank stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Somewhere down there, Linda was probably celebrating her new life with Rick, neither of them understanding that they were already trapped in a web they couldn't see. "What about Tyler?" Morrison's pause was longer than usual. "That's more complicated. He's 17, Frank. Still a minor. He made his choice." Frank's voice carried no emotion. "He chose to mock me, to laugh at what he thought was my failure. He chose her side over mine. He's still your son." Frank turned back to Morrison, and for a moment, his mask slipped. The pain was there, raw and deep, but it was quickly buried under something harder. "My son died today, Morrison. When he laughed at me, when he chose to hurt me for her entertainment, that was the end. What's left is just a stranger who happens to share my DNA." Morrison nodded slowly. He'd seen Frank write off business partners, competitors, even family members before. Once Frank decided someone was beyond redemption, they ceased to exist in his world. "What are your orders?" Frank returned to his chair and began outlining his plan. It was elegant in its brutality, comprehensive in its scope. By the time he was finished, Morrison was taking notes rapidly, occasionally looking up with something approaching awe. "You're not just going to destroy them," Morrison said finally. "You're going to erase them. I want them to understand what they've lost," Frank said. "I want Linda to realize that the man she thought wasn't good enough for her was the source of everything she coveted in another. I want Rick to understand that his entire adult life has been a performance I paid for. And I want Tyler to learn that choices have consequences, even if you're 17. And after," Frank's smile was cold and final, "after, they can find out what life is really like without me. They want to be free of Frank Mueller the contractor. They'll get their wish." As Morrison left to begin implementation, Frank remained in his office, looking out at the city lights. Tomorrow, Linda and Rick would wake up in a world where everything they thought they knew had changed. They would learn that power wasn't just about money. It was about understanding who really held the strings. And Frank Mueller, the man they had underestimated so catastrophically, held all of them. Chapter 3. The Trap Springs. Linda Mueller stretched luxuriously in Rick's king-sized bed, admiring the view from his penthouse apartment. The city spread out below them, like a promise of a life she'd always deserved. She had called in sick to her job at the boutique. Not that it mattered anymore. Soon she'd never have to work again. Coffee, beautiful. Rick appeared in the doorway, already dressed in his expensive suit. He looked worried, which was unusual. Rick was always so confident, so in control. You seem tense, Linda said, accepting the mug. Everything okay at work? Rick sat heavily on the edge of the bed. There's been some complications. Corporate restructuring. Nothing for you to worry about. What Rick didn't tell her was that he'd spent the previous evening in emergency board meetings trying to understand how he'd been ousted from his own company. The documentation was ironclad, the legal framework unassailable. Meridian Holdings had executed a perfectly legal corporate takeover that had been years in the making. His phone buzzed with a text from his lawyer. Meeting at 10 a.m. We need to discuss your employment contract. Come alone. Meanwhile, across town, Tyler Mueller sat in his guidance counselor's office at Westfield High, trying to process what he was being told. I'm sorry, Tyler, but there seems to be an issue with your college applications, Mrs. Patterson said, shuffling through papers with obvious discomfort. The trust fund that was supposed to cover your tuition, it's been dissolved. What do you mean dissolved? That's impossible. My dad set that up years ago. Mrs. Patterson looked genuinely sympathetic. According to the documents I received this morning, Frank Mueller was never the beneficiary of any trust fund. The account was apparently funded by a company called Meridian Holdings, and they've withdrawn their support. Tyler's stomach dropped. That doesn't make sense. My dad's just a contractor. He doesn't have connections to big companies. His phone rang. His mother's number. Tyler, honey, we need to talk. Can you come to Rick's office? Something's happened. The desperation in her voice was something Tyler had never heard before. At Donovan Industries, chaos was barely contained behind corporate politeness. Rick sat across from three lawyers, all wearing expressions that suggested his world was about to collapse entirely. Mr. Donovan, the lead attorney began, your employment contract contains some unusual clauses that we apparently overlooked during your original review. What kind of clauses? Termination for cause includes any personal conduct that reflects poorly on the company's ownership. Dating a married woman qualifies under the morality clause. Rick's face went white. That's ridiculous. Corporate morality clauses are from the 1950s. They're not enforceable. This one is. And there's more. The lawyer slid another document across the table. Your apartment lease, your car leases, your country club membership. They're all corporate benefits tied to your employment. Termination means immediate forfeiture. You're telling me I'm homeless? As of 5 p.m. today, yes. Security will escort you out at that time. Linda arrived just as Rick was reading the final documents. She took one look at his face and knew something was catastrophically wrong. Rick, what's happening? Before he could answer, Tyler burst through the office doors, past security, his face flushed with panic and anger. Mom, what the hell is going on? They're saying Dad cancel my college fund. They're saying he's connected to some big company. Nothing makes sense. Linda stared at her son, pieces of a puzzle she didn't want to solve beginning to click into place. Tyler, calm down. Your father is just a contractor. He makes $23,000 a year fixing roofs. Then explain this. Tyler thrust his phone at her, showing a Google search result. Meridian Holdings. Look at the corporate officers. Linda's hands shook as she scrolled through the information. Chairman and CEO, Franklin J. Mueller. Net worth, estimated at $800 million. Primary holdings, construction, real estate, manufacturing, technology. The phone slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor. That's not possible, she whispered. Frank drives a pickup truck. He wears work boots. He's nobody. Rick stood up slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. He's not nobody, Linda. He's the man who's been signing my paychecks for 7 years. He owns this company. He owns the apartment, the cars, everything I thought was mine. The office door opened, and Morrison Webb entered with 2 security guards. His expression was politely professional, the look of a man conducting unpleasant but necessary business. Ms. Mueller, Mr. Donovan, Tyler, he nodded to each of them. I'm Morrison Webb, representing Meridian Holdings. I have some documents for you to review. He placed 3 envelopes on the desk. These contain the terms of your separation from Mr. Mueller's life. I strongly suggest you read them carefully. Linda's envelope contained divorce papers and an eviction notice. Rick's contained his termination letter and a lawsuit for corporate asset misuse. Tyler's contained documentation that his college trust fund had never legally existed. It had been a corporate scholarship program that was now discontinued. This is insane, Linda said, her voice rising to near hysteria. You can't just destroy people's lives because of a relationship. Morrison's smile was thin and cold. Mrs. Mueller, your husband spent 3 years living below his means to test your loyalty. You failed that test spectacularly. These aren't punishments. They're simply the natural consequences of your choices. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and one more thing. Mr. Mueller asked me to tell you that the locks on the house have been changed back. He'll be home at 6 if you'd like to collect your belongings. I wouldn't suggest staying long. As Morrison left, the 3 conspirators stared at each other in growing horror, finally understanding that they hadn't just betrayed a simple contractor. They had betrayed a man who owned half the city and who had just declared war on them all. Chapter 4. The Reckoning Begins. Frank stood in his kitchen, methodically preparing dinner for one. The house felt different now, cleaner somehow, as if removing Linda's presence had purged it of something toxic. He'd had the locks changed back, not to keep her out, but to make a point. This was still his house, bought with his money, maintained by his labor. Everything she'd taken for granted had always been his. The front door rattled with frantic knocking at exactly 6:15 p.m. Frank smiled slightly. Linda had never been punctual, but desperation apparently improved her timing. He opened the door to find all 3 of them. Linda, wild-eyed and disheveled. Rick, no longer wearing his expensive suit, but cheap clothes that revealed how ordinary he really was. And Tyler, looking young and scared for the first time in years. Frank, please, Linda began, pushing past him into the house she'd locked him out of that morning. We need to talk. There's been some kind of mistake. No mistake. Frank closed the door and leaned against it, arms crossed. Everything that's happened today was planned 3 years ago, the day I decided to test whether my family loved me or just loved what they thought I could provide. Tyler stepped forward, tears in his eyes. Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't mean what I said. I was just upset, and Mom said. Tyler. Frank's voice cut through his son's, pleading like a blade. Do you remember last Christmas when you asked me why I never talked about my work? Tyler nodded miserably. I told you that some things were complicated, and you said you didn't care because complicated things were boring. Frank's gaze never wavered from his son's face. Today you learned that boring, complicated things like corporate structures and trust funds are what determine whether you get to go to college. Do you understand now why I try to teach you to look deeper than surface appearances? Dad, please. You chose your side, Tyler. When you call me today, you weren't just repeating your mother's words. You were enjoying hurting me. You laughed at what you thought was my failure. Rick finally found his voice. Look, Frank, I didn't know Linda was married when we started dating. She told me you were separated. Frank turned his attention to Rick, and the man unconsciously stepped backward. Rick, in 7 years of working for me, you never once wondered how a small construction company could afford to give you such generous compensation. You never questioned why your performance reviews were always exemplary despite your obvious limitations. I earned my position. You earned nothing. I gave you that position because I wanted to study you. I wanted to understand what kind of man my wife would choose over me. Frank's smile was devoid of warmth. Turns out, she chose someone even more ordinary than she thought I was. Linda moved closer to her husband, desperation making her bold. Frank, I made a mistake. I see that now. But we've been married 23 years. That has to count for something. It counted for 3 years, Linda. 3 years where I lived in this modest house, drove an old truck, and worked with my hands to see if you loved Frank Mueller or just loved what Frank Mueller could buy you. Frank's voice remained conversational, but there was steel underneath. Every time you complained about money, every time you looked at me with disappointment, Every time you hinted that I wasn't enough, I was testing you. And Linda, you failed every single test. He walked to the kitchen and returned with a stack of photographs. Do you recognize these? Linda's face went pale as she flipped through images of herself and Rick at restaurants, hotels, shopping trips. Every moment of their affair had been documented with professional precision. I've known about your relationship for 8 months, Frank continued. I could have stopped it at any time. I chose not to because I wanted to see how far you'd go. I wanted to see if you'd ever feel guilty enough to confess, or if you'd respect our marriage enough to end it before pursuing someone else. You were watching me? Linda's voice was barely a whisper. I was giving you every opportunity to prove me wrong. Right up until today, I hoped you might surprise me. Tyler looked between his parents, finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what was happening. Dad, what happens now? Frank's expression softened for just a moment, and Tyler saw a flash of the father he remembered from childhood. Then it was gone, replaced by something harder and more final than anything Tyler had ever seen. Now you learn to live with the consequences of your choices. All of you. He opened the front door. You have 30 minutes to collect whatever belongs to you personally. Linda, your clothes and jewelry, the jewelry I didn't buy. Rick, nothing in this house belongs to you, so you can wait outside. Tyler. Frank paused, looking at his son for what both of them somehow knew would be the last time. Take whatever reminds you of who you used to be before today. As they scrambled to gather their belongings, Frank made one final call. Morrison? Yes, they're here now. Activate Phase 2 tomorrow morning. And Morrison? Make sure they understand that this was just the beginning. Chapter 5, The Web Titans. 3 weeks had passed since the confrontation, and the full scope of Frank's revenge was beginning to reveal itself. Linda had moved into a studio apartment across town, the only place she could afford after being fired from the boutique. The official reason was downsizing, but she suspected the truth was more complicated. Everything in her life seemed to be falling apart with mechanical precision. Tyler was staying with his mother, sleeping on her couch and trying to understand how his entire future had vanished overnight. His friends at school treated him differently now, distant and awkward, ever since the story of his father's true identity had spread through their small community. Rick had disappeared entirely. Linda hadn't heard from him since the day they'd been escorted from the Donovan Industries building. Her calls went straight to voicemail. It was as if he'd simply been erased. She was about to discover that erasure was exactly what had happened. Morrison Webb sat in his office, reviewing the reports from his field teams. Frank's instructions had been specific, systematic destruction, but nothing that could be traced back to them directly. Everything had to appear to be natural consequences, market forces, or simple bad luck. Rick Donovan has been neutralized, his assistant reported. His credit has been destroyed through legitimate debt collection agencies. Apparently, he had several outstanding loans we weren't aware of. The default cascade was efficient. Morrison nodded. Rick's financial destruction had been artfully orchestrated. Old debts have been sold to aggressive collection agencies. Credit reports have been updated to reflect previously unreported delinquencies, and legal notices have been filed in jurisdictions where Rick was unlikely to respond in time. Within 2 weeks, the man had been reduced to living in a weekly rate motel, unable to secure employment or housing. And Linda Mueller? Her employment network has been compromised. Every job interview she's had has been followed by phone calls expressing concern about her character references. The divorce proceedings are advancing rapidly due to her inability to secure adequate legal representation. Tyler, the assistant, hesitated. The boy has been asking questions. He's smart, and he's starting to piece together that none of this is coincidence. He's also been trying to contact his father. Morrison considered this. Frank had been clear that Tyler was to face consequences, but the boy was still a minor. There were legal and ethical boundaries, even in revenge. Continue monitoring, but no direct action against Tyler unless he becomes a problem. Frank may be angry, but he's not stupid. We don't target children. What Morrison didn't know was that Tyler had already crossed a line that would force Frank's hand. That evening, Tyler stood outside the Meridian Holdings headquarters, studying the building where his father, the stranger who had been masquerading as a simple contractor, apparently ran his empire. Security was tight, but Tyler had learned patience from watching his father work. He waited until the shift change at midnight, then slipped through a service entrance that was briefly unmanned. The 40-floor climb took him nearly an hour, but he was determined to confront Frank in his real environment, away from the modest house that now seemed like an elaborate stage set. Frank's office was dark when Tyler finally reached it, but the door was unlocked. Tyler slipped inside, surprised by the opulence that his father had hidden so completely. Awards covered one wall. Corporate photos showed Frank shaking hands with mayors and governors, and the view from the window revealed a city that Tyler was only now realizing his father largely owned. "You're trespassing." Tyler spun around to find Frank sitting in the shadows behind his desk. He was still wearing work clothes, but something about his posture in this environment made him seem different, more dangerous. "Dad, Frank, you lost the right to call me Dad when you chose to hurt me for your mother's entertainment." Tyler's courage wavered, but desperation drove him forward. "I came to ask you to stop. Whatever you're doing to Mom, to Rick, just stop. I get it, okay? You're rich and powerful, and we didn't know. We made a mistake. But this is insane." Frank stood and walked to the window, his back to Tyler. "Do you know what I was doing 3 years ago when I decided to test your mother's loyalty? Working construction. I was recovering from a hostile takeover attempt that nearly destroyed everything I'd built. Men I trusted, partners I'd worked with for decades, tried to steal my companies from me." Frank's voice was quiet but carried clearly in the silent office. "I learned something important from that experience. Loyalty isn't just about love. It's about choosing someone even when you have good reasons not to." He turned to face Tyler. "Your mother didn't just choose another man over me. She actively worked to destroy whatever respect you had for me. She turned my own son into a weapon against me. She was hurt and angry. People say stupid things when they're hurt. Tyler, your mother wasn't hurt when she started her affair with Rick. She was bored. She was disappointed in the life she thought she'd chosen." Frank's eyes held a sadness that Tyler had never seen before. "I gave her 23 years of my life, and when she thought I had nothing left to offer, she threw me away like garbage." "So you're destroying her life? Destroying Rick's life? What kind of person does that?" Frank's expression hardened. "The kind of person who doesn't accept betrayal. The kind of person who believes actions have consequences." Tyler stepped closer to his father's desk, desperate to reach whatever remained of the man who had taught him to ride a bike and helped him with homework. "What about me, Dad? I'm your son. Doesn't that mean anything?" For a moment, Frank's mask slipped entirely. Tyler saw pain, disappointment, and something that might have been love. Then it was gone. "You stopped being my son when you chose to mock me. When you laughed at what you thought was my failure. When you decided that a stranger's money was more important than your father's love. I was 17. I was stupid and angry, and I didn't understand. You understood enough to hurt me deliberately. You understood enough to choose your mother's side over mine." Frank walked around the desk until he was standing directly in front of Tyler. "I spent your entire childhood teaching you about loyalty, about family, about choosing character over comfort. The moment you were tested, you failed." Tyler felt tears streaming down his face. "So that's it? You're just going to pretend I don't exist?" "Tyler, you made that choice first. You called me on Father's Day to tell me I wasn't good enough, that another man was replacing me, that my own son thought I was a failure." Frank's voice remained steady, but Tyler could see the cost of this conversation in his father's eyes. "You can't unmake that choice. You can't take back that laughter. People change. People grow up. I could." "No." Frank's finality was absolute. "Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Some trust, once broken, can't be repaired. You're 17, Tyler. In 8 months, you'll be an adult. You'll face the world with the character you've chosen to develop, and you'll live with the consequences of the choices you've made." Tyler stared at his father, seeing a stranger who wore a familiar face. "You're really going to let Mom destroy herself rather than forgive her?" "Tyler, I'm not destroying your mother. I'm simply withdrawing my protection from the consequences of her choices. For 23 years, I shielded her from the real world. Now she gets to experience it without me." Frank walked back to his chair and sat down, effectively dismissing his son. Security will escort you out. Don't come back. Tyler reached the door before turning back one last time. I used to think you were the best man I knew. Frank didn't look up from the papers on his desk. I used to think you were my son. After Tyler left, Frank sat alone in his office until dawn, staring out at the city lights and wondering if there was a price too high to pay for absolute loyalty. He decided there wasn't. Chapter 6. No Mercy. The Riverside Community Center was hosting its weekly support group for families in crisis, and Linda found herself sitting in a circle of folding chairs, surrounded by people whose lives had also imploded in various ways. She'd been attending for 2 weeks, partly for the free coffee and partly because it was the only place where her story didn't sound. "Linda, would you like to share this week?" asked Dr. Patricia Vance, the volunteer counselor who ran the group. Linda looked around at the familiar faces, single mothers, unemployed fathers, elderly people struggling with medical bills. A month ago, she would have pitied them. Now she was one of them. "My husband is systematically destroying my life," she began, her voice hollow. "Not just financially, everything. Every job interview I go to ends with them suddenly deciding I'm not qualified. My credit score changes daily. Bills I never owed are showing up in collections. It's like he's erasing me." A woman named Cheryl nodded sympathetically. "Vindictive ex-husbands can be brutal. My ex used to hide my car keys so I'd be late for work." Linda almost laughed. "If only it were that simple. You don't understand. My husband owns companies. Major companies. He has resources I didn't even know existed." She pulled out her phone and showed them a photograph of Frank from a business magazine. "This is him. This is the man I thought was a struggling contractor." The group stared at the image of Frank shaking hands with the governor at some corporate event, wearing a tailored suit that cost more than Linda's monthly rent. "Jesus," whispered Bob, a laid-off factory worker. "That's your husband?" For 23 years, he pretended to be ordinary. He lived in a modest house, drove an old truck, worked construction jobs. I had no idea he was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Dr. Vance leaned forward, intrigued despite herself. "Why would someone hide that kind of wealth from their family?" "He says he was testing my loyalty. He wanted to see if I loved him or just loved what he could provide." Linda's voice cracked. "I failed his test." The group was silent for a long moment, processing the implications. "So what are you going to do?" asked Cheryl. Linda had been asking herself the same question for weeks. Every legal avenue seemed blocked. Frank's attorneys were better than anyone she could afford, and the divorce proceedings were advancing with ruthless efficiency. He was giving her nothing beyond what the law absolutely required, and even it seemed designed to humiliate her. "I don't know," she admitted. "I keep thinking there has to be something. Some way to make him understand that destroying me won't fix what went wrong between us." What Linda didn't know was that Frank had no interest in fixing anything. 3 floors above the community center, in the offices of Patterson Marketing, one of the many companies Frank had quietly acquired over the years, Morrison Webb was conducting his weekly briefing. "Linda Mueller has been neutralized as a threat," he reported to Frank via secure video call. "Her ability to cause financial or reputational damage is essentially zero. Rick Donovan has left the state entirely, apparently found work as a night shift security guard in Phoenix under an assumed name." Frank nodded from his office. "And Tyler, the boy is struggling academically. Without the college trust fund, his guidance counselor says his options are limited to community college or military service. He's been working part-time at a grocery store to help his mother with rent." "Good. Reality is an excellent teacher." Morrison hesitated. "Frank, I have to ask, how long does this continue?" "Linda Mueller is essentially homeless. Tyler is a 17-year-old kid whose entire future has been destroyed. At what point is the lesson learned?" Frank's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "Morrison, did I ever tell you about my father?" "No, sir. Vincent Mueller was a mechanic who owned 2 gas stations. Not wealthy, but comfortable. When I was 16, my mother ran off with the man who supplied parts to Dad's shops. She took everything, cleaned out the bank accounts, sold her jewelry, even took the family car." Frank paused, staring out his office window. "Dad never got over it. He died broke and bitter, destroyed by trusting someone who betrayed him the moment a better option appeared. Morrison waited, understanding that this was leading somewhere important. I swore I would never be that weak. I would never trust someone so completely that their betrayal could destroy me. Frank's voice carried the weight of a promise made decades ago. Linda chose her path when she decided I wasn't enough. Tyler chose his when he decided to mock me for her entertainment. They're both adults now, Morrison. Adults live with the consequences of their choices. Tyler's still in high school. Tyler's old enough to understand loyalty and betrayal. Old enough to choose cruelty over compassion. Old enough to laugh at his father's pain. Frank's finality was absolute. Some lessons can only be learned through loss. Morrison. And some bridges, once burned, are meant to stay that way. The call ended, and Morrison sat back in his chair, troubled by what he'd heard. He'd worked for Frank for 15 years, had seen him make difficult decisions, had watched him destroy competitors and rivals without hesitation. But this felt different. This felt personal in a way that might be consuming the man Morrison respected more than anyone else in the world. Meanwhile, across town, Tyler Mueller was stocking shelves at Westfield Market, trying to process how his life had changed so completely in just 6 weeks. His co-workers were friendly enough, but he could see the curiosity in their eyes. Everyone in town knew the story by now. How Frank Mueller, the quiet contractor, had revealed himself to be one of the wealthiest men in the state, and how his family had betrayed him so spectacularly that he'd cut them off entirely. Some people sympathized with Tyler, seeing him as a victim of his parents' war. Others whispered that he must have done something terrible to earn such complete rejection from his father. Tyler knew which group was right. As he arranged cans of soup on the shelf, he thought about the conversation in his father's office, about the look in Frank's eyes when Tyler had called him Dad and been corrected. He thought about the laughter, about the cruel joy he'd felt when he thought he was kicking a man who was already down. He thought about the father who had taught him to throw a baseball, who had helped him with math homework, who had never once raised his voice in anger despite Tyler's teenage rebellion. That man was gone, replaced by a stranger who had the resources to destroy lives and the will to use them. Tyler was beginning to understand that some mistakes were too big to fix, some words too cruel to take back, and some fathers too powerful to forgive. Chapter 7. The Price of Pride. 6 months after Father's Day, Linda Mueller stood in the lobby of the Riverside Hotel, holding a cleaning cart and trying to invisible. The hotel was one of the nicer establishments in town. 4 stars, business clientele, the kind of place she'd once stayed during weekend getaways with Frank. Now she cleaned the rooms. The irony wasn't lost on her that the hotel was owned by Meridian Holdings, Frank's company. Every paycheck she received, every hour she worked, was ultimately at his discretion. He could fire her with a phone call, but he didn't. Instead, he let her work, let her earn just enough to survive in her studio apartment, let her maintain the barest threads of dignity while knowing that her survival depended entirely on his continued tolerance. It was, Linda had come to realize, a far more sophisticated form of torture than simple destruction would have been. "Linda, you've got the penthouse today," said Sandra, the head of housekeeping. There was sympathy in her voice. Everyone knew Linda's story by now, and most of the staff felt sorry for her. The guest checked out early, so it should be straightforward. Linda nodded and pushed her cart toward the elevator. The penthouse was the hotel's most expensive suite, the one that Rick used to book for their afternoon meetings when they thought they were being discreet. She wondered if Frank had assigned her to clean it deliberately, just to drive the point home. The suite was immaculate when she entered. Whoever had stayed there had barely disturbed anything. As she worked, Linda found herself thinking about Tyler. Her son had gotten his GED and was working full-time now, talking about community college but unable to afford it. He'd grown quieter over the past few months, more serious, as if the weight of understanding what they'd lost was finally sinking in. She was stripping the bed when she heard the suite door open. "I thought I might find you here." Linda froze. She knew that voice, had been married to it for 23 years. Slowly, she turned to see Frank standing in the doorway, wearing a business suit that probably cost more than she'd earned in the past month. "Frank." Her voice came out as barely a whisper. He looked older, she noticed. Tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion. Success hadn't made him happy. If anything, he seemed more remote than ever. "How are you, Linda?" The question was so absurd that she almost laughed. "How do you think I am? I'm cleaning hotel rooms for minimum wage. I'm living in a studio apartment with no furniture. I'm exactly where you wanted me to be." Frank walked to the window, looking out at the city below. "This isn't where I wanted you to be. This is where you chose to be." "I chose." Linda's voice rose dangerously. "I chose to have my entire life destroyed because I made one mistake." "One mistake?" Frank turned to face her, and Linda saw something she'd never seen in his eyes before. Genuine confusion. "Linda, you had an affair for 8 months. You mocked me to our son. You changed the locks on our house and told Tyler I was worthless." Exactly which part of that was one mistake? Linda felt tears burning her eyes. "I was unhappy, Frank. I was tired of struggling, tired of watching other wives have things I could never afford. I didn't know." "You didn't know what?" "That I loved you enough to give you everything if you'd just been patient enough to trust me." Frank's voice remained calm, but Linda could hear the pain underneath. 23 years, Linda. 23 years of marriage, and the moment you thought I had nothing left to offer, you threw me away. That's not fair. You hid who you were. You made me think we were poor. I was protecting you from the kind of people who would use you to get to me. I was making sure that if someone loved me, they loved me for who I was, not what I owned. Frank's laugh was bitter. Turns out I was right to be cautious. Linda sank into one of the suite's expensive chairs, suddenly exhausted. "So what now, Frank? You've proven your point. You've shown me what life is like without your protection. How long does this continue?" Frank studied her for a long moment. "What do you want me to say, Linda? That I forgive you? That we can go back to the way things were? I want you to show mercy. I want you to remember that you loved me once. I did love you. I loved you enough to build an empire and hide it from the world just to keep you safe. I loved you enough to live below my means for 3 years to make sure you loved me back." Frank's voice grew quiet. "But love without loyalty is worthless. Trust without faithfulness is meaningless. People make mistakes, Frank. People change. Some changes are permanent. Linda, some choices can't be undone." Frank walked toward the door, then paused. "I've been thinking about what you said that day Tyler called me. You told him I wasn't good enough, that Rick was more successful, more worthy of respect. Do you remember that?" Linda nodded miserably. "The truth is, Linda, I wasn't good enough. Not for you. Because you needed someone who would fight for you, who would prove their worth every day, who would compete for your attention and affection." Frank opened the door. "I needed someone who would choose me even when they thought I had nothing left to offer. We were never compatible in the ways that mattered." "Frank, wait." But he was gone, leaving Linda alone in the penthouse suite with her cleaning cart and the growing understanding that some bridges, once burned, could never be rebuilt. Meanwhile, across town, Tyler Mueller was having his own moment of reckoning. He'd been walking past the construction site where his father's truck was parked. Frank had apparently returned to working with his hands, though Tyler suspected it was more for therapeutic value than financial necessity. Tyler had been walking past the site every day for a week, hoping for a glimpse of the man who used to be his father, try to work up the courage for a conversation he wasn't sure was possible. Today, Frank was sitting on the tailgate of his truck, eating lunch alone. Tyler approached slowly, half expecting to be turned away. "Hello, Frank." Frank looked up, his expression unreadable. "Tyler, can we talk?" Frank gestured to a stack of lumber nearby. Tyler sat down, suddenly aware of how different they both looked. Frank seemed older, more weathered, but also more solid somehow, as if the revelation of his true self had allowed him to finally relax. Tyler, meanwhile, felt smaller than he had at 17, diminished by months of understanding the magnitude of his mistakes. "I got my GD, Tyler said finally. "I know. Congratulations. I'm working full-time now, trying to save money for community college." Frank nodded but didn't respond. "I understand now," Tyler continued, "what I did to you, what Mom did to you. I understand why you can't forgive us." "Do you?" Tyler met his father's eyes. "You spent 3 years testing whether we loved you, or just loved what you could provide. We failed. We failed spectacularly. Yes, you did. I keep thinking about that phone call. About how happy I was to hurt you. About how I laughed when I thought you were weak. Tyler's voice cracked. I don't know who that person was, but I don't want to be him anymore. Frank studied his son for a long moment. Growing up is recognizing that some things can't be fixed, Tyler. Some words can't be taken back. Some trust can't be rebuilt. So, there's nothing? No way back. Frank's expression softened slightly, and for a moment Tyler saw a flash of the father he remembered. Then it was gone. Tyler, the boy who called me on Father's Day and laughed at my pain. That boy was my son. The young man sitting here now, understanding the weight of his choices. You might be someone I could respect, but you're not my son anymore. Tyler felt the finality of it settle over him like a shroud. I understand. I hope you do. I hope you take that understanding and build something better than what you were. Frank stood up, gathering his lunch. But you'll build it without me. As Frank walked away, Tyler remained sitting on the lumber, finally understanding that some consequences were permanent, some losses absolute. His father had taught him one final lesson, that actions have prices, and some prices are too high to ever fully pay. Chapter 8, The Final Gambit. 2 years had passed since the Father's Day phone call that destroyed the Mueller family. Linda had found a strange kind of peace in her diminished circumstances, though she suspected Frank had quietly ensured she wouldn't fall into complete destitution. Her rent was somehow always affordable, her shifts at the hotel were steady, and while she lived simply, she lived. Tyler had surprised everyone, including himself. Working his way through community college while maintaining a full-time job had taught him discipline he'd never possessed as a teenager. He was studying business administration, and his professors frequently commented on his unusual maturity and work ethic. What they didn't know was that every success felt hollow without the approval of the man who had once been his father. Frank had returned to his true nature, a successful businessman who happened to enjoy construction work. He'd sold several companies, consolidated others, and had begun focusing on philanthropic work. The local newspapers occasionally ran stories about anonymous donations to scholarship funds and community programs, but Frank maintained his privacy with the same intensity he'd once used to hide his wealth. On a cold February morning, Tyler made a decision that would either end his exile permanently or give him the closure he desperately needed. He walked into the Meridian Holdings headquarters and asked to see Morrison Webb. Tyler Mueller to see you, sir, the receptionist announced over the intercom. He says it's about his father. Morrison appeared in the lobby 15 minutes later, looking older but still sharp. He studied Tyler with curiosity. The young man had filled out over the past 2 years, looked less like a sullen teenager and more like someone who had learned hard lessons about life. Tyler, this is unexpected. Mr. Webb, I need to ask you something, and I need you to give me an honest answer. Morrison gestured toward his office. I'll listen. They sat across from each other in Morrison's conference room, and Tyler got straight to the point. Is my father having me watched? Morrison's expression didn't change. Why would you think that? Because somehow, every time I've been in real trouble over the past 2 years, help has appeared. When I couldn't afford textbooks, I found an envelope with cash in my locker. When my car broke down, a mechanic offered to fix it for free because he said someone had prepaid the work. When I applied for that scholarship last semester, I was mysteriously selected despite having average grades. Morrison remained silent. I know he's protecting me, Mr. Webb, just like he's protecting Mom. She thinks she's surviving on her own, but I bet if you checked, you'd find that her rent is below market rate. Her job is more secure than it should be, and her medical insurance is better than a hotel cleaning lady should be able to afford. Morrison finally spoke. What makes you think your father would help people who betrayed him so completely? Tyler leaned forward. Because despite everything we did to him, despite how badly we hurt him, he's still my father. And more than that, he's still a good man. He's punishing us, but he's not trying to destroy us completely. Even if that were true, what would you want me to do about it? Tyler pulled out an envelope and placed it on the table. I want you to give him this letter, and I want you to tell him that I'm done accepting his help. Morrison picked up the envelope but didn't open it. Tyler, if your father wanted to communicate with you, you would have done so by now. I know. This isn't about communication. This is about me proving that I've finally learned the lesson he was trying to teach me, which is, Tyler stood up. That real strength comes from standing on your own. That character is what you do when no one is watching, when no one is helping, when you have nothing but your own choices to rely on. He paused at the door. Tell him I said thank you. For everything. Even for the pain. Especially for the pain. After Tyler left, Morrison sat alone with the letter for nearly an hour before calling Frank. We need to meet, Morrison said simply. They met that evening in Frank's office, the same room where Tyler had confronted his father 2 years earlier. Morrison placed the letter on Frank's desk without comment. Frank stared at it for a long moment before opening it. Morrison watched his face as he read, seeing emotions Frank rarely allowed himself to display. Finally, Frank set the letter down. What did you think of him? He's not the same boy who called you that day, Morrison said carefully. He's grown up, learned responsibility, learned consequences. And Linda, she's different too. Quieter. She works hard, doesn't complain, treats her coworkers well. The staff at the hotel respects her. Morrison paused. She asks about you sometimes. Wonders if you're happy. Frank walked to his window, looking out at the city lights. Do you think I was wrong, Morrison? To cut them off so completely? Morrison had been waiting 2 years for this question. I think you did what you thought was necessary to protect yourself from being hurt again. Whether it was right or wrong isn't for me to judge. They destroyed something in me that day, Morrison. The ability to trust completely, to love without reservation. I don't know if that can ever be repaired. Maybe the question isn't whether it can be repaired. Maybe the question is whether you want to try. Frank was quiet for a long time. What did Tyler say when he left? He said to tell you thank you. For everything. Even for the pain. Especially for the pain. Frank closed his eyes. Especially for the pain. He understands now what you were trying to teach him. About choices, about consequences, about character. Morrison moved closer to the window. The question is, what do you want to do with that understanding? Frank picked up Tyler's letter and read it again. Then he walked to his desk and began writing his own letter. Morrison, I want you to deliver this to Tyler tomorrow. And then I want you to arrange a meeting. With Tyler. With both of them. Linda and Tyler. It's time we finish this conversation properly. Morrison took the letter Frank handed him. Are you sure about this? Frank looked older in that moment, worn down by 2 years of anger and isolation. No, but I'm tired of being alone with my righteousness. And maybe Tyler's right. Maybe the lesson has been learned. As Morrison left to arrange the meeting that would determine whether the Mueller family could ever be whole again, Frank stood alone in his office, holding his son's letter and wondering if forgiveness was a luxury he could finally afford, or a weakness he still couldn't risk. Chapter 9. Resurrection. The meeting was set for neutral ground, a small conference room in a downtown office building that Frank owned, but neither Linda nor Tyler had ever seen. Morrison had delivered Frank's letter to Tyler with simple instructions. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., bring your mother. Tyler had found Linda at the hotel in the middle of her shift. When he showed her Frank's handwriting on the envelope, her hands shook so badly she could barely hold it. You want to see us? She whispered. Both of us. Together. Linda sat down heavily in one of the hotel lobby chairs, ignoring the curious glances from guests. Tyler, I don't know if I can do this. It's been 2 years. What if he's still angry? What if he can't forgive us? What if this is just another test we're going to fail? Tyler sat beside his mother, understanding her fear because he felt it too. Mom, we already lost everything. We already know the worst-case scenario. At least this way, we'll finally know where we stand. The next day, they arrived 10 minutes early and waited in the building lobby, both dressed in their best clothes, which weren't very good. Linda wore a dress she'd bought at a thrift store, and Tyler wore his only suit, purchased for high school graduation and now slightly too small. Morrison appeared at exactly 2 p.m. He's waiting for you. The conference room was small and simple, with a rectangular table and 6 chairs. Frank sat at one end, wearing work clothes, jeans, a flannel shirt, work boots. He looked like the man they'd known before everything fell apart, except for his eyes. His eyes held 2 years of accumulated pain and anger and something else that might have been hope. Linda and Tyler sat across from him, suddenly aware of how much they'd both changed. Linda looked older, worn by work and worry, but somehow more authentic than she'd been during her marriage. Tyler looked like a man instead of a boy, carrying himself with a confidence that came from surviving on his own. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, Frank broke the silence. "Tyler, I read your letter. I meant every word." "I know you did. That's why I asked you to come." Frank leaned back in his chair. 2 years ago, you were a spoiled teenager who thought mockery was funny and cruelty was acceptable. Today, you're a young man who's worked his way through college while supporting his mother. That's not the same person. Tyler nodded. "I'm not the same person. The person who called you that day was someone I'm ashamed of. Someone who hurt the best man in his life because he thought it was entertaining." Frank turned to Linda. "And you, 2 years ago, you were a woman who thought she deserved more than what she had, who was willing to betray her marriage for the promise of an easier life. Today, you're someone who works hard for minimum wage and treats her coworkers with respect. That's not the same person either." Linda's voice was barely audible. "I understand now what I lost. Not just the money, not just the comfort, but you. I lost the man who loved me enough to give me everything and ask for nothing but loyalty in return." Frank was quiet for a long moment. "Do you know what the worst part was? It wasn't the affair. It wasn't even the mockery. It was the realization that for 23 years, I was married to someone who was just waiting for a better offer." "That's not true," Linda said, tears streaming down her face. "I loved you. You loved the idea of me. You loved what you thought I could provide. But you never loved me enough to trust me, to believe in me when things seemed difficult." Frank's voice remained calm, but the pain was evident. "When you thought I was failing, you didn't stand by me. You replaced me." Tyler spoke up. "What can we do? How we prove that we've changed?" Frank smiled sadly. "Tyler, that's the wrong question. You don't need to prove anything to me anymore. You've both learned to stand on your own, to face consequences, to build character through adversity. That was the lesson. Then why are we here?" Linda asked. Frank stood and walked to the window. "Because I've learned something too. I've learned that being right isn't the same as being happy. That justice isn't the same as peace. That punishing people you once loved doesn't make the love disappear. It just makes it hurt more." He turned back to face them. "I spent 2 years being angry, and I had every right to be angry. But anger is exhausting, and loneliness is expensive, and I've discovered that I'm tired of both." Tyler leaned forward. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that forgiveness isn't about pretending the past didn't happen. It's about deciding that the past doesn't have to determine the future." Frank returned to his seat. "You both made choices that hurt me deeply. I made choices that punished you severely. We're all different people now because of those choices." Linda found her voice. "Frank, are you saying you can forgive us?" Frank was quiet for a long time, studying both of their faces. "I'm saying that Tyler is no longer the boy who mocked me, and Linda is no longer the woman who betrayed me. You're both people I don't know very well yet, but people I might like to know better." "What does that mean, practically?" Tyler asked. "It means we start over. Not as if the past didn't happen, but acknowledging that people can change, that character can be rebuilt, that trust can be earned again, slowly, carefully, with full understanding of what was lost the first time." Frank reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 keys. "Linda, this is to a house on Maple Street. It's small but comfortable, and it's yours for as long as you want it. Tyler, this is to an apartment near the college. Your tuition has been paid through graduation." Linda stared at the key in her palm. "Frank, I can't accept this. Not after. You can accept it because you've proven you can survive without it. The woman who betrayed me was motivated by greed and fear. The woman sitting here now has learned to work hard and live simply. I'm not giving you charity, Linda. I'm offering you the foundation to build whatever life you choose to build." Tyler was holding his key like it might disappear. "What about you? What do you fit in this new life we're supposed to build?" Frank's smile was real for the first time in 2 years. "That depends on what kind of people you choose to be going forward. The father you remember is gone. You killed him that day on the phone. But the man sitting here now might be someone you could learn to respect, and who might learn to trust you again. How do we do that? Linda asked. The same way we did everything else, one choice at a time, one day at a time, one conversation at a time. Frank stood up. But this time, we do it with full knowledge of who we really are, what we're really capable of, and what the real cost of betrayal can be. As they prepared to leave, Tyler turned back to his father. Frank, thank you for the lesson, for the consequences, and for this chance. Frank nodded. Tyler, I was never trying to destroy you. I was trying to save you from becoming someone you couldn't live with. The question now is whether you can become someone I can learn to love again. I'm going to try. That's all anyone can do. 6 months later, Frank received an invitation to Tyler's college graduation. At the bottom, in Tyler's handwriting, was a simple note. I know I'm not your son anymore, but I hope someday I might be someone you're proud to know. Frank wrote back, you already are. And for the first time in 3 years, Frank Mueller, contractor, businessman, and father, smiled without reservation, understanding that some stories end not with revenge or forgiveness, but with the possibility